the morning to you. It's Monday, the 12th of September, a beautiful day, 11:20, 73, sunshine, and we're live from the palatial radio estate. Glad you could join us. And I tell you what, right now, pull the cover up over your head or open the windows, turn the lights on, because you might get scared over the course of this next segment. We've got Joshua Simpkins with us here this morning. Good morning, Joshua. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thanks.
Excellent. Now, Joshua is the author of the book Haunted Marion, Ohio. Now, you can get your copy at Rocky's Cyclery and Fitness at East Church Street, the Marion County Historical Society and Heritage Hall. Books on Center at 150 West Center Street. And now, Joshua's also going to be at the Marion Public Library coming up this Thursday at 7 o'clock. He'll be signing copies of the book, and you can pick your own copy up for $20. And he'll also be selling and signing books on Saturday the 17th from 1 to 4 at the Marion County Historical Society. So with all that being said, Joshua, talk to us about Haunted Marion, Ohio.
Well, the book had its origins in a website that I run. It's called SpookyMarion.com. And the way that came about is I was kicking around the idea with my nephew, who's younger, he's about 20 now, that I told him once that I thought Marion was a very interesting town. And he was 20 and fresh out of high school and couldn't wait to get out of Marion and go study somewhere. And he said, how can you say that? There are much more interesting cities than Marion. And I said, I don't think so. I think there's some good stories floating around. And kind of that discussion was kind of the seed from where this website came, and then eventually the book. So in about 2008, I started the website. I bought the domain, SpookyMarion.com, and went to the library and started collecting old stories. A few years later, a little press out of South Carolina called the History Press, they contacted me and they said, we have a series of books called Haunted America, and would you like to write a book for it? And I said, okay. And that was kind of how the book came about. I started last...
I'll bet you said more like, heck yes.
Yeah, I said, I'll be famous, you know?
Yeah.
No, I started in December. I was home. I actually live outside of Marion now, so unfortunately... because of job reasons.
Sure.
But I came back for Christmas, and that's when I started doing research and started interviewing people and really collected all of my information and photos and old pictures from the Historical Society. And then I spent the winter writing the book, and in July I think it was finished, and they copy-edited it, and it just came out in the beginning of September.
And one of the important things for the people to understand here is that this is not a novel. This is not something that Joshua has dreamt up.
Right.
Where did these stories come from?
Most of the stories come from going through old editions of the Marion Star. That was a good source. You'd be surprised at kind of the weird stories that pop up here and there. There's one story in the book. It's called, or one chapter, it's called Mysterious Lights Over Henneman Woods. And for, I think, in the teens, at some period, there were people seeing mysterious lights floating above northern Marion. And that was in the newspaper for about a week, and then it never turned up again. It just kind of came and went, and I find those stories interesting.
Sure. I want to ask you, though, when you see a story like that with your background and education, are you able to say now, maybe 80, almost 90, 100 years later, that what those people might have been seeing could have been X or Y or whatever?
Yeah, sure. People have asked me, do I actually believe in ghosts and things like that? And I would say I believe that there's science that we haven't yet discovered. But as far as ghosts, and I put this in the introduction of the book, I've never personally seen anything that I couldn't explain. And if I did see something, I would assume that it was could be explained somehow. But
sure.
You know, I'm open to the unexplainable.
Now, the cover of your book has a brilliant full moon on it with a picture of the Harding home with a bright light coming out of the top window. Now, is there any conclusion to be drawn from that picture?
You know, I took that photo myself, and then I sent it off to the publisher, and I think they did a little bit of photoshopping on it, too, to make it look extra special. But, you know, the Harding home has some good stories associated with it as well, and that was one of the places that I looked when researching for this book. There's a series of books by Chris Woodyard called Haunted Ohio, and she mentions Marion a few times in the book, and one of the things she mentions is the haunted home. And the good thing that she does, she cites all of her sources as well. So I could go back to the original Marion Star articles and kind of see where she got her information. And that was really kind of the jumping off point for my book, especially with regard to the Harding home.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about cemeteries in Marion, because you can't talk about Haunted Marion without talking about the cemeteries. And one of the things, I guess I'll just let you start, and I'll have a couple of questions, I'm sure.
Well, if we're talking cemeteries in Marion, I think there are two that are kind of interesting. There's a cemetery located on Quarry Street, which a lot of people don't even know is there, because it just looks like a deserted, vacant lot. But it's actually a cemetery, and if you walk around on the lot, there are still a few gravestones there. Most of the bodies that were in that cemetery, they actually moved out to the Marion Cemetery, which is the other kind of interesting cemetery here in Marion. So the Quarry Street Cemetery is interesting because there was a cholera epidemic in the 1850s, and I think it was something like, it's in the book, I think 3% of Marion's population died. And they put a lot of the bodies there, and then suddenly that cemetery was full, and that's what made them decide to build the new cemetery on the north end of, or no, that'd be the south end of town.
Right. And I guess in that cemetery there's a Revolutionary War soldier. Right.
There's actually the gravestone is there as well, but as far as I know, that's not the original tombstone. There are a lot of weird stories circulating about that cemetery, but this is kind of hearsay at this point. But one of the stories is that the city removed the standing headstones so they could mow it easier. And another kind of interesting story was that they took those headstones and they put them under the hill at Lincoln Park before they put the earth there. And I don't know if that's true, but I find those stories kind of interesting.
Now, I guess not as Joshua Simpkins, but as an author, how do you work to verify those accounts, or maybe just work to smooth it over so the reader can, be comfortable with drawing his own conclusion?
Well, I put it this way. There's a pretty extensive bibliography in the back of the book, so you can actually look and see where I found all of my information. But whether you choose to believe those stories is up to you. I found them, I quoted them, I used them for the book, but whether they're actually true is something I'll leave up to the reader. So I have my own doubts, but...
Okay. Now, Marion Cemetery.
Yeah, that's also interesting in that it has a few things where there are also interesting stories floating around. Perhaps the best story associated with the Marion Cemetery is the Merchant Ball, which I think everybody in town knows. And, it's that huge granite ball that moves under its own power out there.
Okay.
A news story that I found while doing the book was there's a receiving vault there, and it's actually where they stored, or where they kept Harding's body before they put him in the monument. And one of the interesting stories was that while he was in the receiving vault, they kept hearing strange noises throughout the cemetery, and they actually had armed guards on duty, and they actually opened fire a few times, as far as I understand, but they never actually caught anyone who was making strange noises or ever pinned down where they were coming from. So that's another that's kind of interesting.
Now, I'm flipping through the book, and I'm going to throw some things at you, so if I need to pass the book back to you so you
sure,
can...
no problem.
But I just don't want you to feel uncomfortable. But the grave marker with the glowing eyes.
Yeah. That's also in the Marion Cemetery. And that I heard from a guy, he's a local artist, his name's Joe Howard, and he gave a talk at the library a long time ago, and he said there was a cemetery that if you shined a light on it, he said that that it had glowing eyes, and he said, but he gave what to me is a more interesting story. He said there's an explanation for it, and he said that the police, to prank other policemen, would pull up onto that statue and shine their headlights on the statue, and then send the other guy up to check it out. And as the other policemen approached that statue, they would cut the lights to the car, and the eyes would, in fact, be glowing. And a few summers ago, I went into the cemetery with my nephew, who shows up in a few of those stories, the same one who was complaining about there was nothing interesting in Marion. We went into the cemetery with a flashlight, probably trespassing, and we shined a light on the statue and then turned it off, and the eyes were, in fact, glowing. And what I think is the explanation, there has to be something growing on the statue that luminesces after it's exposed to light.
Okay.
But it's a cool story.
It most certainly
is. I actually talked to someone in the police force here in Marion. He didn't want me to identify him in the book, and he said I asked him if that was a true story with the pranking other policemen, and he said there were a lot of pranks that went on years ago in the Marion Cemetery because they have to drive through. So he said he hadn't heard that particular one, but he believed it was possible.
Okay. Let's see now, the Harding Hotel. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, when I went to write this book, I kind of created a list of historic buildings around Marion that I thought would be interesting to research and see if there was any good stories. And the Harding Hotel was clearly going to be on that list because it is such a historic building.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in there one day. I just kind of wandered in off the street, and I went to talk to... I wanted to talk to the manager of the building, but she wasn't in. And as I was out there waiting for her, one of the maintenance personnel wandered by. It was an older woman. And I kind of laid out this premise for my book to her, which is kind of... it's a ridiculous premise when you first hear it. People are going to think you're a crackpot. But she thought about it, and she said, you know what? I have some stories to tell you. And she kind of took me on an impromptu tour right through the Harding Hotel and told me some pretty decent stories that ended up in the book.
Really?
So...
now, let's see. Is there any reason to believe that from these stories we could say that the Harding Hotel is haunted?
I don't know. According to that woman, the woman I interviewed, she clearly had some, what I would call ghostly experiences there. So it might be fair to say.
Mm-hmm. The Palace Theater.
That was another one that was also on that list of, historic downtown buildings. And I talked to the director at the time, and she was relatively new, but she put me in touch with Elaine Merchant, who called me back, and she told me... They have a ghost that they say haunts the palace. They call Christine. It's not a very substantial story, but it's kind of one of those stories that gets passed around by people who I think take part in the musicals there.
Sure.
So Claire Cook also, she does musicals there at the palace, and I talked to her, and she said she had a few weird experiences about a light that was coming on and off. George Schramm, who's also done productions there, he said he came in one day and heard someone singing, rehearsing, and of course no one was in the building. So things like that. I mean, I wouldn't say anything overt or anything, so dramatic, but
sure,
definitely little interesting tidbits.
Okay. There are a couple of modern stories in here. The Nelson Street haunting.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that.
So a few of the stories in the book were actually more true crime stories, I would call them. They weren't really spook stories. But the Nelson Street story, for example, I got an email from a girl I actually went to school with, and she told me she grew up in a house that's where they had some kind of, they said it was haunted, and I didn't think much of the story at the time, but then I did a little bit of research and found out there was actually, in fact, a murder in that house in the 60s. So to me, that's just as interesting as someone telling you their house is haunted. You could say, well, at least... If you do believe it's haunted, it has its basis in some kind of horrible event like a murder. Right. There was actually two teenage girls who killed their father. I guess their father had been abusing them and mistreating them, and they killed him. And actually, both of them were found not guilty.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you would, tell us a little bit about the Marion Country Club murder, if you can.
Yeah, that's one of the more famous, again, more of a true crime story. There was a young woman named Annette Huddle who she worked there at the country club in the early 80s, I think 81. And there was another guy who worked there by the name Paul Mack. And he's never actually been charged with the crime, but everyone is pretty sure he murdered her. And they found her body, I believe, in the Olentangy that summer.
Mm-hmm.
What's funny is he disappeared. They never had enough evidence to charge him, and he disappeared. And then he murdered a woman in California, and he's actually in prison right now for that crime. But everyone believes he also murdered Annette Huddle. The ghost story part of that is that her ghost haunts the grounds of the Marion Country Club. It's actually a story I heard from my niece who worked out at the country club when she was a teenager, and I assume it's a story that gets passed around from teenager to teenager as they take over.
Right.
I mean, it's a pretty tragic story, really,
It is.
and I did my best when writing these stories not to. I wanted to be compassionate with these stories because she was a real person,
Sure.
and had a family and friends here in town, but.
Right.
But it's also an interesting story. This Paul Mack character was actually featured on America's Most Wanted, and it was someone in Marion who identified him.
And close the loop on the California crime?
Someone called from Utah is where he disappeared to, and someone called from Utah wanting references on a character, and she recognized that was this Paul Mack that the police were looking for, and they caught him. So Marion is where he kind of started, and it's what kind of ended his story.
Okay, now, one of the things that I guess I wanted to ask you is that in the course of putting this book together, what kinds of things did you learn about the city of Marion that maybe you didn't know?
People like to talk about how bad Marion has become, or in the good old days when Marion was so much better. And if I can draw any conclusions, I can tell you that Marion has always had its fair share of murder and mayhem and strange things happening. That's nothing new. I mean, I'm trying to think of a good example from the book.
Maybe from the past or from the present?
Yeah, from the past. Some crazy things that happened in the past. I mean, I think in 1910 there was a guy down on the west end of Marion. He walked into his girlfriend's house on her birthday. This is a guy who's like 20 years old, and shot her, and he shot her new boyfriend, and then he took off running.
Right.
And, I mean, this is something, I think a similar thing to that just happened here in Marion a few weeks ago. So that stuff has always been happening, and people just tend to forget and look at the past with rose-tinted glasses, I think. So.
Sure. Okay, well, Joshua, any chance you're going to maybe put the pen to another book?
Man, I don't know. That was a lot of work, and I have a wife and a small baby at home, and I remember I was writing it in the basement because I couldn't concentrate in my house, and yeah, I don't know if I will
was it
do
the
it
spirits keeping you from concentrating?
Yeah. No, it's more like a 2-year-old.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, once again, let's see. You're going to be at the library on Thursday at 7 o'clock. You'll have copies of the book there. What kinds of things are you going to be doing when you're at the library?
Yeah, at the library, I'd like to give more of a formal talk and talk about a little bit of where this book is coming from and the origins and how I went about researching it, and kind of open it up to questions and answers if people have them. And I was hoping at the end maybe that people, if they have their own experiences or news stories, maybe they could inform me. So
okay.
I have this website, and that is nice that I can continuously update it or change things as they come to light. So it's kind of a work in progress.
Okay, then Saturday in the afternoon, 1 to 4, you're going to be at the Historical Society. What are you going to be doing at that one?
Right, and that'll be more, people can come and go as they want. I'll just be there during their regular opening hours, and they can buy a book. The Historical Society said they've ordered 50 copies, so they should be on hand. And if you want me to sign it, or if you want to discuss anything about the book, I'll be more than happy to do that.
Okay. Now, if you'd like to pick up your copy of the book, beginning tomorrow, these books will be available at Rocky's Cyclery and Fitness, 239 East Church Street, Marion County Historical Society and Heritage Hall, and Books on Center at 150 West Center Street. Joshua, I want to thank you for your time.